Page 912. Elie Wiesel. If the Greeks invented tragedy, the Romans the epistle, and the Renaissance the sonnet, our generation invented a new literature, that of testimony, Elie Wiesel once remarked. Nearly everything that Wiesel has written or said publicly since surviving the Holocaust has been a testimony, an effort to tell the world about the horrors of the Nazi death camps and to prevent such atrocities from happening again. Wiesel grew up in a close-knit Jewish community of Siget, a village of Romania's Carpathian Mountains. His world was centered on religious studies and family life. But this secure existence was brought to an abrupt end with the arrival of the Nazis in Siget in 1944. All the Jewish inhabitants of the village were deported to extermination or concentration camps in Poland. Wiesel, then 15 years old, was separated from his mother and sister immediately upon arrival in Auschwitz. He never saw them again. In late 1944, Allied armies approached Germany. The outlying concentration camps were evacuated by the SS, Schutzstaffel, special Nazi police forces in charge of the camps. The SS troops forced prisoners to clean up the camps to destroy evidence of the troops' crime. They then forced the surviving prisoners to march to camps inside Germany to prevent their liberation. Many inmates perished during these long journeys, known as death marches. Wiesel and his father were forced to take part in such a march, which took them to the death train that Wiesel describes in this excerpt from the final chapters of Night. In the spring of 1945, just before the war ended, the young Wiesel also lost his father. Alone and ill, one of Europe's millions of displaced persons, Wiesel settled in Paris after the war. He wrote the first version of his autobiography in Yiddish in 1955. The manuscript was later revised and shortened and was eventually published as Night, now considered one of the most powerful accounts of the Nazi atrocities. Since writing Night, Wiesel has produced many works about the Holocaust, the systematic mass murder of European Jews by the Nazis. In 1986, Wiesel was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. In his acceptance speech, he explained why he has never stopped reminding the world of the Holocaust. We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Page 914. From Night. Elie Wiesel, translated by Stella Rodway. We stayed at Gleiwitz for 3 days without food or drink. We were not allowed to leave the barracks. SS men guarded the door. I was hungry and thirsty. I must have been very dirty and exhausted to judge from the appearance of others. The bread we had brought from Buna had long since been devoured, and who knew when we would be given another ration? The front was following us. We could hear new gunshots again, very close. But we had neither the strength nor the courage to believe that the Nazis would not have time to evacuate us, and that the Russians would soon be here. We heard that we were going to be deported into the center of Germany. On the 3rd day, at dawn, we were driven out of the barracks. We all threw blankets over our shoulders like prayer shawls. We were directed toward the gate, which divided the camp into 2. A group of SS officers were standing there. A rumor ran through our ranks. A selection! The SS officers did the selecting. The weak to the left, those who could walk well to the right. My father was sent to the left. I ran after him. An SS officer shouted at my back, "Come back here!" I slipped in among the others. Several SS rushed to bring me back, creating such confusion that many people from the left were able to come back to the right, and among them, my father and myself. However, there were some shots and some dead. We were all made to leave the camp. After a half-hour's marching, we arrived right in the middle of a field divided by rails. We had to wait for the train to arrive. The snow fell thickly. We were forbidden to sit down or even to move. The snow began to form a thick layer over our blankets. They brought us bread, the usual ration. We threw ourselves upon it. Someone had the idea of appeasing his thirst by eating the snow. Soon the others were imitating him. As we were not allowed to bend down, everyone took out his spoon and ate the accumulated snow off his neighbor's back. A mouthful of bread and a spoonful of snow. The SS who were watching laughed at this spectacle. Hours went by. Our eyes grew weary of scouring the horizon for the liberating train. It did not arrive until much later in the evening. An infinitely long train composed of cattle wagons with no roofs. The SS pushed us in, 100 to a carriage. We were so thin. Our embarkation complete, the convoy set out. Pressed up against others in an effort to keep out the cold, head empty and heavy at the same time, brain a whirlpool of decaying memories. Indifference deadened the spirit. Here or elsewhere, what difference did it make? To die today or tomorrow or later? The night was long and never-ending. When at last a gray glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes. Heads sunk upon shoulders, crouched, piled one on top of the other, like a field of dust-covered tombstones in the first light of dawn. I tried to distinguish those who were still alive from those who had gone, but there was no difference. My gaze was held for a long time by one who lay with his eyes open, staring into the void. His livid face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father was huddled near me, wrapped in his blanket, his shoulders covered with snow. And was he dead too? I called him. No answer. I would have cried out if I could have done so. He did not move. My mind was suddenly invaded by this realization. There was no more reason to live. No more reason to struggle. The train stopped in the middle of a deserted field. The suddenness of the halt woke some of those who were asleep. They straightened themselves up, throwing startled looks around. Outside, the SS went by, shouting, "Throw out all the dead! All corpses outside!" The living rejoiced. There would be more room. Volunteers set to work. They felt those who were still crouching. "Here's one. Take him." They undressed him, the survivors avidly sharing out his clothes. Then 2 grave diggers took him, one by the head, one by the feet, and they threw him out the wagon like a sack of flour. From all directions came cries. "Come on, here's one. This man next to me, he doesn't move." I woke from my apathy just at the moment when 2 men came up to my father. I threw myself on top of his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hands, crying, "Father, Father, wake up! They're trying to throw you out of the carriage!" His body remained inert. The 2 gravediggers seized me by the collar. "Leave him! You can see perfectly well that he's dead." "No!" I cried. "He isn't dead, not yet." I set to work to slap him as hard as I could. After a moment my father's eyelids moved slightly over his glazed eyes. He was breathing weakly. "You see?" I cried. The 2 men moved away. 20 bodies were thrown out of our wagon. Then the train resumed its journey, leaving behind it a few hundred naked dead, deprived of burial, in the deep snow of a field in Poland. We were given no food. We lived on snow. It took the place of bread. The days were like nights, and the nights left the dregs of the darkness in our souls. The train was traveling slowly, often stopping for several hours and then setting off again. It never ceased snowing. All through these days and nights we stayed crouching, one on top of the other, never speaking a word. We were no more than frozen bodies. Our eyes closed. We waited merely for the next stop, so that we could unload our dead. 10 days, 10 nights of traveling. Sometimes we would pass through German townships. Very early in the morning, usually. The workmen were going to work. They stopped and stared after us, but otherwise showed no surprise. One day when we had stopped, a workman took a piece of bread out of his bag. and threw it into a wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought each other to death for a few crumbs. The German workmen took a lively interest in this spectacle. Some years later, I watched the same kind of scene at Aden. The passengers on our boat were amusing themselves by throwing coins to the natives who were diving in to get them. An attractive, aristocratic Parisian was deriving special pleasure from the game. I suddenly noticed that 2 children were engaged in a death struggle, trying to strangle each other. I turned to the lady. "Please," I begged, "don't throw any more money in." "Why not?" she said. "I like to give to charity." In the wagon, where the bread had fallen, a real battle had broken out. Men threw themselves on top of each other, stamping on each other, tearing at each other, biting each other, wild beasts of prey, with animal hatred in their eyes. An extraordinary vitality had seized them, sharpening their teeth and nails. A crowd of workmen and curious spectators had collected along the train. They had probably never seen a train with such a cargo. Soon, nearly everywhere, pieces of bread were being dropped into the wagon. The audience stared at these skeletons of men fighting one another to the death for a mouthful. A piece fell into our wagon. I decided that I would not move. Anyway, I knew that I would never have the strength to fight with a dozen savage men. Not far away, I noticed an old man dragging himself along on all fours. He was trying to disengage himself from the struggle. He held one hand to his heart. I thought at first he had received a blow in the chest. Then I understood. He had a bit of bread under his shirt. With remarkable speed, he drew it out and put it in his mouth. His eyes gleamed. A smile, like a grimace, lit up his dead face, and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had just loomed up near him. The shadow threw itself upon him. Fell to the ground, stunned with blows. The old man cried, "Meir, Meir, my boy, don't you recognize me? I'm your father. You're hurting me. You're killing your father. I've got some bread for you too. For you too." He collapsed. His fist was still clenched around a small piece. He tried to carry it to his mouth, but the other one threw himself upon him and snatched it. The old man again whispered something, let out a rattle, and died amid the general indifference. His son searched him, took the bread, and began to devour it. He was not able to get very far. 2 men had seen and had hurled themselves upon him. Others joined in. When they withdrew, next to me were the 2 corpses, side by side, father and son. I was 15 years old. In our wagon there was a friend of my father's called Meir Katz. He worked as a gardener at Buna and used to bring us a few green vegetables occasionally. Being less undernourished than the rest of us, he had stood up to imprisonment better. Because he was relatively more vigorous, he had been put in charge of the wagon. On the 3rd night of our journey I woke up suddenly and felt 2 hands on my throat, trying to strangle me. I just had the time to shout, "Father!" Nothing but this word. I felt myself suffocating. But my father had woken up and seized my attacker. Too weak to overcome him, he had the idea of calling Meir Katz. "Come here! Come quickly! There's someone strangling my son!" A few moments later I was free. I still do not know why the man wanted to strangle me. After a few days, Meir Katz spoke to my father. "Colomo, I'm getting weak. I'm losing my strength. I can't hold on." "Don't let yourself go under," my father said, trying to encourage him. "You must resist. Don't lose faith in yourself." But Meir Katz groaned heavily in reply. "I can't go on any longer, Colomo. What can I do? I can't carry on." Please read the rest all by yourself. You can do it.